On behalf of the National Cotton Council, I want to thank the Kansas Cotton Association for their support and willingness to promote this meeting. Included in the chat is a link showing how your membership dollars enhance your bottom line as a producer. The meeting slides and other Farm Bill materials are available by following the link. The purpose of today's meeting is to provide you with information about the changes in commodity and crop insurance policies related to cotton, which were finalized with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Specific details will be given on the increase in the reference price for seed cotton, improvements to area-wide crop insurance products, modifications to the marketing loan, and additional enhancements, including in the legislation. This meeting is not intended to debate any merits of the specific farm program or crop insurance changes, but to inform you on how to best maximize the benefits of these provisions for your farming operation. The program today will be presented by Dr. Gary Adams, President and CEO of the National Cotton Council. Following the presentation, adequate time is set aside for questions. Thanks again for attending, and I now turn the program over to Gary Adams.
Well, thank you, Dan, and for that introduction. And let me welcome everybody to this Farm Bill session. Certainly appreciate you taking time out of your day, and I know what is a very busy time of year with harvest getting ready to start. We do want to take those time to talk to you about the provisions of the new Farm Bill. Kind of walk through some of the changes, some of the things that you need to be aware of. I'm going to see here, get my slideshow going. Well, and if there are questions along the way, you might use the reaction, maybe raise your hand. Riley, I might ask you to let me know if somebody does have a burning question. I can stop after some of the sections just to try to entertain some questions. But you know, the new Farm Bill provisions, we're all aware, came through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed by Congress earlier this year. I think it was signed by the president in early July. And that really gave the opportunity for a number of enhancements to both Title I, which are the farm safety net provisions, as well as what we refer to as Title 11 or crop insurance provisions. Overall, it was an increase of about $60 billion or so of additional funding in those titles. You know, we started our process as a cotton industry back really in about 2022 in terms of coming up with the industry's priorities that we wanted to see addressed in the new Farm Bill. And really, as we look at what was included in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, in some form or fashion, all of those priorities were addressed. And we'll walk through a lot of these items that are on the list in terms of the reference prices, some of the changes to crop insurance, some of the enhancements to the support for our domestic textile manufacturers as well. But let's first start with the PLC ARC program, so price loss coverage, ag risk coverage programs that producers have the choice of signing up in each year. In terms of the seed cotton reference price, beginning with this year's crop, the 2025 crop, the reference price will increase from 36.7 to 42 cents. We'll talk about that level and what that means as we think about it in terms of where lint prices or fiber prices are. But it will be at that level for pretty much the duration of this piece of legislation. And I will say this legislation, the provisions that are in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, cover the 2025 through the 2031 crop years. We'll add, as you see in that second bullet, that with the 2031 crop, the reference price for all covered commodities is increased by basically 0.5%. And then it continues to increase in each year of the subsequent years of the 10-year baseline. That's really more about building baseline budget authority for when we get to the next Farm Bill debate down in 2031, 2032. But for all practical purposes, think about the seed cotton reference price is going to be 42 cents for the coming years. Now, there has been in place in the past a reference price escalator that can allow the effective reference price to move above the statutory level. There were some positive changes in that as well in terms of the calculation of the effective reference price. We don't anticipate that that will kick in for seed cotton. It really requires a sustained period of high market prices to get that to kick in. But if we look across the reference prices for the major commodities covered in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, you can see in this chart a comparison of the statutory reference prices under the OBBA and the 2018 Farm Bill, and increases across the board in terms of those statutory reference prices. I talked about the seed cotton number from 36.7 to 42 cents, but you look at corns from 370 to 410, sorghum 395 to 440, soybeans, you can see the increase from 840 to 10, and then wheat up from 550 to 635. I will call your attention to the two columns on the right, which are the effective reference prices that are actually in place for the 2025 crop. And a couple ones to note is corn. It does increase. It'll be 442 instead of 410. And then in the case of soybeans, it's 1071 versus $10. And then also on sorghum, it's 467 versus 440. So there are some instances where the effective reference price formula does come into play and offer some additional support above the statutory reference price levels. Now, growers had already made their ARC PLC election before this bill was passed. And so given that decision was already made, the way that payments will be handled for the 2025 crop is that growers will automatically receive the higher of the ARC county level payment or the PLC payment, regardless of the election that was made. Would say this only applies to the 2025 crop. In 2026 and beyond, growers will still go in at the beginning of the year and make that decision, and that decision will dictate your payment that comes at the end of the marketing year. But for this year, these payments that will come based on the 2025 crop will be the higher of the ARC county or the PLC payment. And those are the payments, given the timing, those are the payments that come in October of 2026. The other question that we've gotten a lot as we've been doing these Farm Bill meetings over the last couple of weeks is, well, what about growers who purchase stacks for this crop year, but they now would like to, if they have seed cotton base acres, would like to change their enrollment in the PLC ARC program. There is an opportunity to do that. It has to be done though by September 30 to enroll in the PLC ARC. Also, as a condition of making that late change, and the grower would like to opt out of their stacks insurance policy, there is a 60% penalty. Basically, the grower is still going to owe 60% of the stacks premium, but they will be allowed to make that change if they've decided on a farm where they had purchased stacks, but they also have seed cotton base acres. They are given the option, but that has to be done by next week, by September 30. It's our understanding FSA will run a register. So even though they may not be able to process all of them by September 30, I think it's important that growers get into their FSA office and at least get their name on the register with their intention to do so. If we try to unpack a bit of what we mean, or what a 42-cent reference price means when we look at it in terms of the estimated lint and cottonseed prices, we're using the latest data from USDA. They release every month, they release their estimates of both the lint price and the cottonseed price. Also remind you, this is a marketing year average price, which means it runs from August 1 through July 31. So we're still not yet 2 months into this 2025-26 marketing year. But if we look at the most recent estimates by USDA, they have a 64-cent lint price and a $224 per ton cottonseed price. You apply the appropriate weights to those two prices, that comes out with a seed cotton market year average price of $34.25. And so we now can work through and see, okay, well, what does a PLC payment look like at $34.25 market year average price? We'll compare that to 42 cents. That's 7.75 cents per pound. If we use a PLC lint yield of 800 pounds, multiply that by 2.4, because that's the standard conversion applied to everybody's lint yield, that gives us 1,920 pounds. And if we drop down to the calculations at the bottom of the page, that's 7.75 cents per pound times 1920 times 85%, because it's paid on 85% of base acres, is $126. Now that per base acre, that compares to $40 per base acre if we were still using the 36.7 that was under the 2018 Farm Bill. So it is a good improvement in the reference price for seed cotton relative to where we were under the 2018 Farm Bill. You'll have, and as it was mentioned in the introductory comments, all of these PowerPoints are included on our Farm Bill website. So I would just make note that you can download and look at these in more depth later. We wanted to kind of demonstrate for a producer based on what their lint payment yield would be. And you can see in the left-hand column it going from 200 pounds up to 1,500 pounds of lint yield. Multiply that by 2.4 to get your seed cotton payment yield. It'll give you some sense of the reference price or the PLC payments per acre at each of those various payment yields. It obviously can also take your exact payment yield and plug it into the formula and get a sense based on right now of a price of $34.25, what payment yields would likely be at various or payments would likely be at various payment yields. Also, from a historical perspective, just in terms of trying to get a better context of what 42 cents means, if we look back to 1990 and just do a comparison, a calculation of seed cotton prices based off both the lint price and the cottonseed price that prevailed in those market years, we've only had 3 years where the actual seed cotton market price exceeded 42 cents. You can see it happened in 2011 by just a small amount, and then both in 2021 and 2022, when we had some much higher lint prices than current levels, that we did see the seed cotton reference price move above 42 cents. But in general, compared to history, I think the 42 cents does provide a solid level of support for producers. And I think going forward, more often than not, we're likely to see a PLC payment trigger. Another reference material that's in the PowerPoint for you is to, again, give you a further illustration of how it looks if we compare lint prices going down the left-hand side, cottonseed prices going across the top, that we can look at the resulting seed cotton prices by basically picking a row. If we want to look at 64 cents, which is the price we talked about earlier, and then we look at, in this case, $225 per ton, you can see where those intersect. It's that cell that's circled, that's about a 34.2 cent price. So this will just, again, be a guide for you in terms of looking at where the market prices are for lint and seed to give you an idea of the seed cotton prices. I think the point to make here is that those cells that are in green are prices that are basically at or below 42 cents. So if you're in a cell if the price comes out at a cell that is in colored green, PLC payments are triggered. It's when you get to those higher levels and the cells are white, that we see PLC payments being turned off. And the point being that we're really having to, for prices between, say, $200, $220 per ton on cottonseed, we have to get up to 82 to 84 cents a pound before we turn off a PLC payment. And this is a market year average price at the farm gate that's published by USDA's NASS when we talk about these prices on the left-hand side. If you wanted kind of another rule of thumb, and we think about watching the New York futures contract, and how does a New York futures contract compare to the farm gate price, the historical wedge between those two, or price gap between those two, is usually about 4 to 6 cents. Now, it will bounce around depending on specific market conditions in any given year, but if you look at it over time, it's usually 4 to 6 cents. In other words, the futures price is likely trading 4 to 6 cents higher than what NASS is going to publish as a farm gate price. So having said that, I think as we look at, again, a general rule of thumb, that if futures prices are trading, into the upper 80s, that's the point where you start to turn off a PLC payment. As you trade from the upper 80s and below, in most cases, under normal price relationships, a PLC payment would be triggered. So again, I think that it is going to provide a good level of support going forward. And usually it's going to be from that mid to upper 80s level on the New York futures and below in terms of whether or not there's a PLC payment that would be triggered. Now, I also want to talk about some of the improvements in the ARC program, and this is the county level revenue program where PLC is a price-based program. The revenue guarantee to trigger an ARC payment was increased from 86 to 90%. So in other words, we now only have to have a 10% decline in the county revenue level relative to the benchmark, and the maximum payment was increased from 10% to 12%. So effectively now an ARC payment would get triggered from 90 and get maxed out down at 78, whereas before it was from 86 down to 76. If we look at the benchmark seed cotton price that's going into it and then take 90% of that, that comes out with the 38.11. And again, where the price for seed cotton is around 34 cents, it's likely that you're going to see ARC payments also trigger for the 2025 crop. Again, the price is the expected market price is below that benchmark price that goes into ARC, or 90% of the benchmark price, so it's likely that it will trigger. However, I still think coming off of a 42-cent reference price, in all likelihood, the PLC payment right now is going to be larger than what the ARC County payment will be for the 25 crop. Just as a quick recap on, again, some of the differences between ARC and PLC. PLC price-based only. I mentioned this earlier. You look at what the maximum payments could be in times of low prices. Maximum payment under PLC is going to be significantly higher than what the maximum payment on ARC can be. There's some changes in the interactions between crop insurance decisions and PLC ARC programs. I'll get into that more when we get into the crop insurance section, particularly as it's the interactions now between ARC, SCO, and ECO. You can essentially have both PLC and ARC and also purchase those shallow loss area-wide insurance products. I think as we look back on the some of the various outcomes that we can see, and I'll talk about that a little bit. In most price and yield outcomes, the PLC looks to be a more viable option than the ARC, and particularly if you consider combining PLC with some of the enhanced SCO and ECO products. I think this is the last chart in this section where we wanted to demonstrate a comparison of PLC and ARC. I know there's a lot of information on this table, but I'll just kind of cut to the chase in terms of what the comparisons represent. The left-hand side is the market year average price. We go from a low of 55 up to 85 cents. We then look at a range of county level yields from a low of 300 pounds to a high of 900 pounds. Kind of pick 600 pounds and 70 cents as a medium or an average level. Those are the column and row highlighted in gray. But for each of those yield and price outcomes, we calculated, well, what would be the PLC payment for that county, and then what would be the ARC payment for that yield and price outcome. And then if the PLC payment is higher than the ARC payment, then that's denoted by the letters PLC in the cell. If ARC is higher, likewise, it's denoted by ARC in the cell. The point being that as we look across all these range of outcomes, there are some situations where ARC proves to be favorable to PLC. That's typically in the times of higher prices and below average county yields. But if those aren't the cases that prevail, or those aren't the expectations going into a particular year, PLC is the better option. And really, as you look at this matrix, you're talking about probably 80% of the sales or so. PLC is the preferred outcome relative to ARC. So again, It will be an individual decision between those two programs going forward. Encourage producers always to look at both options, but as we've analyzed it with a 42-cent reference price, PLC typically comes out to be the more attractive option than the ARC program. Let me stop there and see if there's a quick question or two that anybody wants to address before we jump into the next section, which is base acres. Okay. All right. If not, and again, we'll have time at the end as well. But let's talk about base acres. And there is a new provision in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that will allow some new base acres to be added to qualifying farms. We are going to put a disclaimer out that the examples we work through, the information we're going to provide you is based on our interpretation of the legislative language. We know that it's going to take some time for FSA to work through the implementation guidelines. And so there are some details that are not specifically addressed in the legislative language. And we've tried to make our best judgment on that. But until we see the guidelines, there will still be some question marks that need to be worked through. Okay, so this is an allocation of new base acres is the provision that I want to talk to you about. And I want to put stress the word new. This does not have anything to do with existing base acres. Existing base acres for covered commodities will stay as they are. So any farms that already have existing base acres, those existing base acres will stay as they are. Now, those farms that have existing base, or maybe farms that have no base at all, will have the opportunity to add new base acres provided they meet the eligibility criteria. And those eligibility criteria are laid out on this chart. And first is, did you plant some covered commodity on that farm during the 2019 to 2023 period? And those were the years that were picked in the legislation in terms of deciding or determining what would the eligibility for adding new base. So first off is there has to be a covered commodity planted at some point during the 2019 to 2023 period. And if that's the case, if there was a covered commodity planted on, then go to number two. And in effect, it gets more complicated than how I want to try to boil it down. But did the planted acres for covered commodities exceed the total base acres? In other words, in its simplest form, were your planted acres on that farm in excess or exceeding your total base acres? When we talk about planted acres, that's the 5-year average over the 2019 to 2023 period. So basically, you've got a farm where plantings exceed current base. If that's the case, then that's also gives you the opportunity that the farm could be eligible. Now, I said in its simplest interpretation, we were simply looking whether or not planted acres exceed base. The fine print to all of that is down at the bottom of the chart in terms of, okay, when we talk about this term reallocation planted acres, what does that mean? Well, it means what's been your covered commodity planted and prevent plant acres, plus any non-covered commodity planted and prevent plant acres, provided though that those non-covered commodity acres do not exceed 15% of the total acres on the farm. So another way to think about it is it's going to count, and when it looks at your total planted acres, it's going to count all your covered commodity planted and prevent plant acres, and then it will count your non-covered commodity planted and prevent plant acres up to a point that it equals 15% of your total acres. And we'll look at an example, and I think it'll become much clearer in terms of looking at the potential to add new base. But that's what we mean by that term reallocation planted acres. And that total is what must exceed total base to determine eligibility. So again, we've highlighted this, the point I made earlier. This is not a reallocation of current base acres. Your current base acres are going to be maintained, but this is a one-time allocation of new base acres. The remainder of this is largely a repeat of what I mentioned earlier when we look at the exact definition of covered commodity planted acres and non-covered commodity planted acres. Include all your covered commodity planted and prevent plant acres. You can only include your non-covered commodity planted and prevent plant acres, but only up to a point that it equals 15% of the total acres on the farm. And I would say, so as you look at potential new base acres, it's going to be the amount by which that planted acreage total, that reallocation planted acres exceeds your total base. And then it will also add in any unassigned base that may be on the farm. And if you recall, unassigned base came about back in, I think it was probably about 2017 or so, 2018, when seed cotton came back into Title I, and we converted generic base back into seed cotton and other covered commodity bases. And in some circumstances, farms were given what was referred to as unassigned base, which are base acres right now that could currently receive no support, but they do come into the calculations. The other caveat I would add is the reminder at the bottom that says total base acres on the farm cannot exceed the total acres. So it's still, as farms look at adding base acres to the farm, it is going to be the case that those will be limited by the total acres on the farm. Okay, the other point to bring out in terms of this particular provision is that once we decide or there are new base acres that can be identified on a farm, those new base acres are going to be allocated in proportion to the ratio of the covered commodities planted on the farm during 2019 to 2023. So again, if there are new acres to be added, those acres then will be assigned based off of the planting history on the farm for 2019 to 2023. It's not a situation where a grower is able to choose, which covered commodity they would like for those new base acres to be. It's going to be, and as we'll see, based on what the crops that have been planted, that's the new base acres that will be assigned. A couple of other points to add, and one is that a limitation is plugged into the legislative language, and it says that new base acres for the United States cannot exceed 30 million acres. If the total exceeds 30 million, then there will be a prorated reduction to all new base acres. So we would assume if once this process is completed, and let's just say there turns out to be 33 million new base acres that would like to be added across all farms across the United States, then all farms would be prorated back. Since it's a 10% overage, it would be prorated back in that particular case to adhere to the 30 million acre cap. Now, there's been analysis by the University of Missouri that has looked at the potential to add some base acres. And they used a couple of different approaches, and it was based on county level data. I think in one approach, they came out with around 26 or 28 million base acres, 26, I think. And then in another approach, it came out somewhere around 32 to 33 million acres of potential new base. Jody has done analysis for us looking at all the Cotton Belt states. And I think across the Cotton Belt, her analysis, and again, using county level data, was coming up with maybe around 1.2 or 1.3 million acres. Again, to kind of taking that county by county approach. In Kansas, she also came up with some potential to add some base acres for seed cotton in Kansas. Admittedly, this is going to be a farm by farm decision. The county level data is the most defined granularity we had for performing that analysis. But I will say, as we've gone around and done farm bill meetings over these past couple of weeks, I've had quite a few growers that have looked at some farms that have come into production in the last several years, or some farms that do not have as much base as they've been planting, that see an opportunity to add some base acres. Now, if you do already have base acres on the farm, then that PLC yield will be applied to the new base acres. If it has no PLC yield for a crop, then the average PLC yield for the county will be used. Okay, so I mentioned some examples earlier, and I'll walk through 2 or 3 examples again. I encourage you to take an opportunity to look at these after the presentation as well. And we're going to just use a simple 1,000 acre farm that the planting history for the farm for covered commodities is 500 cotton and 500 corn. And those numbers we're reflecting, we would assume to be the 5-year averages for 2019 through 2023, since that's the relevant years to look at. There are 800 current base acres on the farm. There's no non-covered commodities. There's 800 current base acres that we assume to be 500 cotton and 300 corn for purposes of this example. And then there are 200 unassigned base acres on this farm. So that gives us 1,000 total acres on the farm. What we refer to as the reallocation planted acres, which are all the covered commodities plus a portion of the non-covered, is also 1,000. It's been fully planted, in this case, to cotton and corn. So first question as we kind of move down the chart or the slide is, have reallocation planted acres exceeded current base? Yes, the 1,000 acres of cotton and corn exceed the current base of 800. So it does. Obviously it's been planting a covered commodity, and those planted acres exceed current base. It meets the 2 eligibility criteria. The next question is, does it have unassigned base? And in this case, it does. This farm is assumed to have 200 acres of unassigned base. So we go through and move to step 1, which we look at, well, what would be the potential new base on this farm? So going back to the formula we talked about earlier, we take the reallocation planted acres minus the base acres. So that's your 1,000 acres of planted minus 800. That's equal to 200. And then we add in the 200 of unassigned base. And that gives you, according to the formulas in the Farm Bill, that gives you 400 acres of potential new base. Now, if we drop to step 2, this is where one of the limitations of the restrictions is going to come into play, and that is that total base acres cannot exceed the total acres, the land acres on the farm. And if you look at the numbers we just worked through, it had 800 acres of current base. We talked about the potential new base being 400. Well, that would be 1,200 acres of base in total on a 1,000 acre farm. And that's where, in this example, the limitation for total acres is going to come into play. And now it will be just the new potential base is going to be actually 200 acres instead of 400. And so that will move the total base acres up to 1,000. And so it is going to give this particular farm the opportunity to add 200 acres of base to their existing 800. So their current base is 500 and 300. Their planting history is a 50-50 rotation between cotton and corn. So we're going to take that 50-50 rotation and apply those percentages to the new base of 200. And that's going to become, half of it's going to become cotton, half of it's going to become corn. It will give us 100 acres of new cotton base and 100 acres of new corn base. And when we go through and add that up, that would be, now we would add that to the existing base and we would get 600 of cotton and 400 of corn. So this farm is able to add base, but that new base is based off the planting history. One variation on this would be that, suppose this particular farm had not been cotton and corn had not been the planting history. Suppose it was 100% wheat for the last 5 years. If that was the case, that it was all planted to wheat, then the new base would have become, of 200 acres, would become all wheat. And then that would have become new wheat base, and it would still retain its 500 of cotton base and 300 of corn base. So again, the planting history is going to determine how any new base acres are assigned or allocated. Let's go to a second example, and this came up in some of the Farm Bill meetings as well, is let's assume we have a farm, 1,000 acres again. In this case, it's been 600 cotton and 400 corn has been your average plantings over that relevant period. There's no current base on the farm. There's no unassigned base on the farm. So this might be a farm that has come into production sometime in the last several years. Perhaps it was in pasture, or perhaps it was in trees or some other ag use, has no base acres associated with it. So in this case, your planted acres of 1,000 is greater than your base, which is 0. It has no unassigned base. So you work through steps 1 and step 2. And in this case, this farm has the potential to add 1,000 acres of base, since that's its plantings, and that's by how much its plantings exceeded base. The planting history is 600 and 400, or 60% and 40%. So that 1,000 acres is going to be allocated as 60% to cotton, 40% to corn. And in this case, this farm would move from having historically no base to, after this allocation, it would have 600 of cotton and 400 of corn. I would also add too that based off the legislative language, since this farm had no base already previously assigned to it, then the PLC yield that's going to go along with this new base is going to be that average PLC yield for whatever county this farm is located in. Now, one more example to work through, and again, just to add another little twist to the farm, to the example, to illustrate some of the provisions that are in the bill. We're again going to assume that there's 1,000 acres of covered commodities planted on the farm, 500 cotton, 500 corn in this case. We're also going to assume that there is some non-covered commodity. Perhaps that's a vegetable crop of some kind, maybe a melons of some kind. But let's assume there's 300 acres of that non-covered commodity that's planted on this farm. We're also going to assume that this particular farm, which has now 1,300 acres of land, because it's got 1,000 planted to covered commodities and it's got 300 to a non-covered commodity, that on that farm, it currently has 500 acres of base assigned. So you essentially have a 1,300 acre farm, 1,000 acres have been planted to covered commodities, 300 to a non-covered commodity, and you have 500 acres of current base. So how do we calculate, now this has the wrinkle in it of non-covered commodity. How do we calculate what the reallocation planted acres are? Well, again, thinking back to the formulas that we talked about earlier, first you take the covered commodity acres, which in this case is 1,000, and then you take the non-covered commodity acres of 300. However, in this particular instance, you can only take those non-covered commodity acres up to the point that they equal 15% of the total acres on the farm. Well, 15% of 1,300 is 195. So in this particular instance, the farm is not able to capture or utilize all of the non-covered commodity acres. It can't utilize the full 300, but it can use the non-covered commodity acres up to the point that it equals 15% of the total land on the farm. And so that's where we get the number of 1,195. We're taking the 1,000 acres of covered commodities, we're adding to that essentially 195 acres of those non-covered commodity plantings. So that drops us down to looking at some of the questions. Does it qualify for new base acres? Well, those reallocation planted acres, which are 1,195, do they exceed the current base acres? And again, the current base is 500. They do. And 1,195 is greater than 500. So the potential is, if you look at step 1, the potential new base acres is 695 acres. The amount by which 1,195, which is the calculated plantings or the reallocation plantings, exceeds the current base of 500 acres. Now, step 2 is that total base acres cannot exceed the total acres on the farm. That's not a problem here. We're talking about taking base up to 1,195, and there's 1,300 acres of land on the farm. So we're not hitting that constraint. So we're able to add 695 acres of new base to this farm. Current base, as a reminder, is 400 of cotton and 100 of corn. The planting history is all cotton and corn, is a 50-50 mix of cotton and corn. So 695 acres of new base will be allocated 50% to cotton, 50% to corn. That turns out to be 347.5 acres of new base to each of those two commodities. And so we'll add that to the existing base for each of those two commodities. And this farm will come out of this process with 747.5 acres of cotton base and 447 acres and a half of corn base. So it's, again, it's an example of you had more plantings on this farm than what you had existing base. And the farm then was given the ability, the opportunity to add new base acres. Now we've been asked, let me just make a couple of comments, a lot of questions we were asked about how this is going to be actually implemented. We're not, we don't have the details. My speculation is that USDA is going to look at the certified acreage on the farms over this history and probably come back to the farms and present the data that they have on record for those farming operations in terms of planted acres. And then the grower likely will have an opportunity to question that if some of the data doesn't match their records. But that's probably the case, is get it put in place, notify the producer that it looks like this farm is eligible to add these number of acres, and give the producer a period of time by which, or the landowner, give that person the amount of time by which to make a final decision if they want to accept these new acres. But like I said, as we've looked at county level data, as we've heard from some individual producers on feedback, we do believe across the Cotton Belt there are going to be some opportunities and some farms for which new base acres can be added. So I think this is another nice benefit that came out of the program. Okay, so that's base acreage. Let me talk a little bit about crop insurance changes that are in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, because they're significant changes. And really they come about in the way of higher premium subsidies. So that portion of the premium subsidy that's covered by the government was increased in a number of instances for various across the commodities. One of the biggest changes has to do with the area-wide policies. And specifically, I'll focus on supplemental coverage option, which is SCO, or the enhanced coverage option, which is ECO. And those are area-wide products that apply to a range of commodities, not just cotton, but it does apply to cotton. They're similar to stacks in the fact that they can be triggered off of county level revenue. It's an area-wide product. Now, the big change that has occurred since the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is that premium subsidy on SCO and ECO has moved from 65% to 80%, putting it on par with the premium subsidy of stacks. So all other things being equal, we should now have SCO and ECO producer paid premium rates at a lower level than what they were previously when we had the 65% subsidy level. Now, if we look at individual coverage, whether revenue product or yield product, if you're doing basic or optional units, then we do see some increases in the premium subsidies at various coverage levels, starting at 55% and going up to 85%. And then also, as we look at individual coverage on enterprise units, there's some changes to higher coverage levels as well. And notably, and some of those up to 70% coverage was already at an 80% premium subsidy, but now 75% coverage for an individual RP or YP policy is also at 80%. So if we think about it, we'll talk about it in a little more detail. This is effectively now giving a producer the opportunity to insure with enterprise units up to a 75% individual coverage and get 80% premium subsidy. And then on top of that, through a combination of SCO and ECO, a grower could opt for area-wide coverage that would go from 75 up to 95%, and that would have an 80% premium subsidy. So really encourage producers to look at that combination of insurance products now that will carry an 80% premium subsidy, and all of those can be had while at the same time enrolled in a PLC or ARC program. So again, encourage growers to look at that, because this is some new flexibility and some new opportunities that were previously not available to the grower. Now, there's a couple of wrinkles to make you aware of, and this is really just kind of to work through the implementation and given some of the timing of documents that have already been prepared for the 2026 crop. The SCO actually increases from 86 to 90% beginning with the 2027 crop. And again, some of the documents were already prepared in advance of this legislation coming about. But growers still for 2026 can get the higher coverage levels and the 80% premium subsidy for the 2026 crop. It's just that to get to 90% or 95%, it'll actually be a combination of SCO and ECO. But if you were looking at wanting to get to 90% coverage for the 26 crop, it would technically be SCO up to 86 and then add ECO from 86 to 90. ECO can also go up to 95. They both carry an 80% premium subsidy for the 26 crop. So again, it's a little bit of a wrinkle that just has to do with the timing on implementation. But at the end of the day, SCO and ECO can be purchased that give you the coverage all the way up to 95%. Mentioned this earlier, those can also be purchased on farms enrolled in PLC or ARC. Now, I will say that Stacks stays in place. It is the same product as it was before the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So it also still has the 80% premium subsidy, then the 90% top end coverage and all the other features like the protection factor and all those things. So, if you have a farm without seed cotton base, certainly continue to look at Stacks as an option. The restriction between Stacks and ARC and PLC does remain in place. So that's why I think if you're looking at a farm with seed cotton base on it, you'd want to look at SCO as probably the more viable option. A lot of this is kind of a recap of points that I've already made. One other thing about SCO, it does require individual coverage underneath it. Now, if that individual coverage is, say, below 70%, 65%, for example, SCO will go all the way down to where that individual policy starts. Stacks, if you recall, would cover you down to 70%, but it did not go any lower. But SCO, once we get to 2027, would go from 90% down to whatever your individual policy is. And then ECO has not been around that many years. Area-wide policy sits on top of SCO. But now with it moving to 80% premium subsidy, you've also got the situation where that's something ought to be looked at because it becomes also more affordable relative to what it was and gets up to 95% coverage level. One of the things that we've looked at, and again, we've done this for a number of counties, is just to compare, well, how different would the current bill have been if it had been in place from 2015 through 2024? And if you recall, if you look at the lighter colored bar, that was the choice that we had under the 2018 Farm Bill. It was going to be essentially either you enrolled in PLC or you purchased Stacks. It was an either or. In the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, you're able to enroll in PLC and purchase this enhanced SCO. And so that's where what we designate by the darker blue bar. And you can see that over time, particularly in years of low prices, this combination of 42-cent PLC and SCO will be a more attractive option and will provide more benefits back to the farm than what we had in the way of choosing between 36.7 or Stacks. Now, there's a couple of years, 21 and 2022, when it did not matter. And again, those were times of high prices and neither the 36.7 or the 42 cents triggered. So in times of high prices, if there's no PLC payment, these programs will look very similar. But in times of low prices, it can be a significant advantage. And if you look at what would have been for the 24 crop, that's coming up to about $80 per acre of additional benefit than what would have been delivered than what was delivered under the 2018 Farm Bill. Now, let me touch on the marketing loan program because there are some changes there as well that will take effect at different times. looking at the actual loan rate for upland cotton, that's going to increase to 55 cents for base grade cotton, effective with the 2026 crop. The current level is 52 cents. But for the 26 crop, that will increase to 55 cents, and then the normal premiums and discount schedule will apply to the 55-cent level. Storage credit, so that reimbursement or that accommodation for warehouse storage charges for loan redemptions in times of low prices, those credits will have increased, and those will become effective for the 2026 crop as well. So if we look, what's relevant for Kansas, that's going to move from $2.39 per bale per month to $3 per bale per month. Now, in times of low prices, how we determine the value at which a loan is repaid, we typically think of that being the adjusted world price, or the AWP. That becomes critical because in times of low prices, you want to try to make that loan redemption cost as low as possible. And there's a couple of changes in the Farm Bill that will do that. One is what we refer to as AWP flexibility. That's a new provision in this bill that's specific to cotton, that effectively will establishes a 30-day window from the time the loan is repaid. Then if the AWP were to move lower at any time over the next 30 days, then essentially the redeemer of the cotton is going to get a refund on that based on that lower value. And I'll walk through an example. As we've looked at it historically, we think that's an average benefit of about 1.2 cents per pound. Also, in the calculation of the adjusted world price, and to calculate the adjusted world price, USDA looks at the Far East market and the price quotes that are published by Cotton Outlook. And right now they use those 5 lowest Far East quotes. The legislation specifies that USDA shall move to the 3 lowest quotes. And the 3 lowest quotes are always going to be, the average of those is going to be lower than the average of the 5 lowest. And on average, that benefit is about 0.6 of a cent per pound lower. And that is going to take effect as well. It's very likely at some point during the 2025 marketing year. So the combination of all of these are to try to add value to the marketing loan program. I talked about the AWP flexibility example. If we look at one where we're putting cotton in the loan and for the 2026 crop, and let's just assume October 15 of 26, we put it in the loan at 55 cents. Let's say about 6 weeks later, we choose to redeem the cotton from the loan on November 30. That starts the 30-day clock of, okay, well, are there any better opportunities that the producer would have had to have redeemed if they had waited? Well, let's assume on November 30 that the AWP is 50 cents. That's going to be the redemption price or the redemption cost when the grower makes that decision to redeem. 30-day period is going to be from December 1 through December 30. And what we've done is just assume, some weekly AWPs over those subsequent 30 days. Let's assume it goes down to 49 cents in that week of December the 5th through the 11th. Then the following week goes down lower to 48. Then it starts to rally as late toward the end of the year, the calendar year, goes up to 50, and then it goes to 51 cents. USDA will look back over that 30-day period and they'll say, well, what was the best opportunity the grower would have had for redeeming the cotton? When could it have been redeemed at a lower price than what they did at 50 cents? And it was 48 cents. So that's why there would be a refund of 2 cents. So that's, I think, a way to, one, move cotton into the marketing channel earlier, not kind of have to worry as much about timing that bottom of the market in terms of an AWP, and just know that you've essentially got a 30-day window of protection that if the situation became more favorable, you're going to get the benefits of that more favorable situation. And it's only a one-sided bet here, because if it started at 50 cents and let's just assume for those 30 days it only went higher over the course of those 30 days, well, then nothing changes. You've redeemed at 50 cents and that's it. It's only would there have been a movement that would have been to the advantage of the producer, and if so, then provide that advantage to the producer after that 30-day window is closed. Mention this again, loan rate storage credits are designed or are legislated to begin with next year's crop. We're working with USDA now on the quickest implementation we can for 3 versus 5 in the 30-day flexibility period. We know they're working on that, but that's going to require regs to be published before those can take effect. But I do think it can happen at some point within this marketing year. A couple of other comments about some of the provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and I'll talk about payment limits. The payment limit for ARC and PLC has been increased from 125,000 to 155,000. And it is also indexed to inflation moving forward, as determined by the CPI. Point being, it will increase as we go forward. It will increase from, if there's 2.5% to 3% inflation, then by the time we get out to say 2029 or 2030, that 155 could be more in the range of 170,000 to 175,000. So there are some beneficial changes on the payment limits. There's also some changes to address how S corps and LLCs are treated relative to general partnerships, and will be advantageous to some of the farming operations that are structured as an S corp and an LLC. I would encourage you to, talk to your accountant or the attorney you're working with on your farm structure and really determine if some of these changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act are applicable to your farming operation and may be a benefit as you look at your structure relative to eligibility and payment limits. Few other Farm Bill provisions. I mentioned this earlier. We do have an increase in the support to the domestic textile industry that goes from 3 cents to 5 cents per pound of cotton consumed. I would also make mention of the fact that the bill increased the pot of money used for trade promotion funding. This provides the funds, for example, that Cotton Council International works with when they're promoting U.S. exports of cotton fiber and cotton yarns. So we've seen that double in this bill. That'll give us some more resources to more effectively promote the exports of cotton and cotton textile products in the global market. And then finally, just to highlight some of the tax provisions that are important to agriculture. And again, won't get into the details, but if you recall, the primary purpose of going down this road of reconciliation was to address some of the tax provisions that would have been expiring. Those tax provisions approved in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act would have been expiring at the end of this year. And so they needed a vehicle by which to extend those or improve those. And there are a number of improvements that relate specifically to agriculture. So as you work with your accountant, look at your tax liability and your farming operation, encourage you to dig into those. Nothing was moving backwards in terms of the tax liability for farming operations. I think everything was an improvement relative to where we were. It was either a continuation or an improvement relative to where we were. So some positives on the tax side as well that came out of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Let me just briefly touch on a couple of other NCC priorities that we're working on, and then we've gotten a lot of questions about this. But we continue to hear the concerns from the industry about the very challenging financial situation facing growers. And this is now, for some, the 2025 crop is the third year in a row where things are not cash flowing, given cost of production and given where the market prices are. And we're continuing to convey that to both the administration and Congress and really talk about the need for some type of, we'll refer to it as a bridge payment. The majority of the benefits under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act do not actually materialize or show up in the producer's bank account until October of 2026, when those higher payments show up from PLC and ARC. But it's a long time until October of 2026, and that's the message we're sending, and we're going to continue to work with other commodity groups and try to push that forward. I am encouraged somewhat to hear acknowledgement by both USDA officials as well as Senator Bozeman, chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, and Congressman G.T. Thompson, chair of the House Ag Committee. So I do think there's an understanding of the pressure that's out there. And really, you can pretty much look across the row crops and see that financial pressure. So I can't say much beyond that in terms of, what will happen, you know, if it will happen. I mean, all those are still questions, but I do think there's growing momentum. There's a growing understanding of the challenges that are out there, and we're gonna continue to push this forward and hope to try to secure some type of additional economic assistance, either through congressional avenue or through USDA's use of CCC funds, or maybe even tariff dollars. The other legislative priority for the cotton industry is what we refer to as the Buying American Cotton Act. And this was an idea that really came out of industry discussions going back into 2024 of trying to come up with ways that we could stimulate and reward or incentivize the use of U.S. cotton. And that concept has now become a piece of legislation. And that concept was to look at tax credits that would be available to brands and retailers if they document the use of U.S. cotton or U.S. cotton manufactured products in their finished goods. And so it has to be, documented through a trustworthy supply chain traceability system. But if they do that, then they are eligible to apply for tax credits. There's been legislation introduced in the Senate side that was introduced by Senator Hyde Smith of Mississippi, and she has 8 co-sponsors on the legislation, including Senator Marshall of Kansas. And so we're encouraged to see that there's a piece of legislation out there. We do believe this is something that can provide a benefit to U.S. cotton over competing growths of cotton, or even over polyester. So we do believe it spurs additional demand for cotton, tightens up the balance sheet, and can support cotton prices. So we're excited about the feedback that we've received. We've got a lot of support for a number of brands and retailers who are willing to work with us on trying to secure this legislation. So where are we going to be focused our efforts to going into the fall is first getting a bipartisan bill introduced in the House of Representatives. We want to do that this month. We're talking to now offices that could lead that. And once we can get that bill introduced, then it would be really an industry-wide effort to get as many co-sponsors on that piece of legislation as well. And then figure out, well, what can be a larger legislative vehicle for us to attach that to. Perhaps there's been a bipartisan tax bill, could still be in the future later this year. Congressman Jason Smith, chair of the House Ways and Means, has talked about that. There will have to be an end of year spending package or some type of spending package to keep the government open. And there's even been some talk of a second reconciliation bill as a possible vehicle. I mean, we will need to have some larger vehicle with which to attach this to, but that's our focus as we go over the rest of this year, is to figure out, one, get the bill introduced on the House, get as broad a support as we can, and then look for the opportunity to add that to a larger legislative vehicle moving forward. The other area, and again, this relates to what we can do to try to stimulate and build cotton demand. And that's a campaign that launched just in the last 2 weeks against microfibers and microplastics. You can look in whether it's scientific journals or it's popular media. We're seeing more and more stories about microplastics and microfibers that are showing up in the environment. So they're showing up in our water supply. They're showing up in our food. They're finding these microplastics, microfibers in our bodies. And so we want to try to call attention to the dangerous health impacts of microfibers. And those are microfibers related to synthetic apparel, so essentially polyester clothes, and use that as a way to talk about cotton as a healthy alternative, because we see this as an opportunity to build cotton demand and demonstrate that cotton is a healthy alternative to polyester. And so we launched a campaign back on September 10th that it launched. And really it's an effort to raise public awareness, educate U.S. consumers. It is referred to as Plant Not Plastic. What you wear matters. and this is an industry-wide initiative to call attention about the impact of our clothing choices and its potential health implications. So we're very excited about the launch that we've seen. That was just the first step in this effort to really try to leverage all of the other information that's going on in a much broader scale than the cotton industry, but how can we build off of that and really try to push forward and grow cotton demand and claw back some of that market share relative to man-made fiber. So we're excited about this campaign. Check it out on social media. We have a website that you can look at as well and see some of the materials that have already been developed. And I mentioned this was launched on September 10th. Well, the other opportunity that we see is with the Make America Healthy Again campaign. And if you recall, back earlier this year, the MAHA Commission released a report, I think that was late May, early June, where there were some concerning things in that report, particularly as it related to crop insurance products. We had a chance to meet with some of the MAHA officials earlier this summer. Our Vice President of Council Operations, Marjorie Walker, met with them. She had a chance to convey those concerns about their stance on crop protection products, but she also had the opportunity to talk about, the issue with synthetic fibers, microplastics, microfibers. And so on September 9th, an updated MAHA report was released, and they had actually toned down their language somewhat on crop protection products, which was encouraging to see. But also of note is that they included in their short section calling for more study on the health impacts of microplastics, microfibers, and specifically called out synthetic textiles. So we were very encouraged to see acknowledgement of that issue in the MAHA report, and that would not have happened without the National Cotton Council bringing that to their attention. And that's another area where we want to try to leverage going forward, because I do think we have a great opportunity in front of us to really build demand, make consumers more aware that what they wear matters, and hopefully build demand. Because I will say it's great that we have an enhanced safety net that's helping to weather the downturn in low prices, but at the same time, we've also got to get back to a point where we can kind of jumpstart cotton demand on a global basis. We've been languishing somewhat for the last several years in that 115 to 118 million bale range, and I would say that if we could get that up in the 125 million bale range, then markets would look much different than where they do today. So that's our work on this effort to try to move that forward. So with that, I'm going to stop. That's all the information that I had today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I appreciate your patience. I know I've been going for a while now, a little over an hour, and covering a lot of material, but certainly welcome any comments or questions that you may have about any of the material that was covered today. And again, just reiterate that on our Farm Bill website, this presentation is available along with other information related to the Farm Bill. And we will continue to update that as well as more information comes out of USDA. So with that, let me stop and see if there is a burning question or two that folks would like to ask.
Gary, I do have a question on the reallocation of for the adding new base acres. If they double cropped a year, will they get to pick the initial one of those two crops, or will it be split? I know a lot of these guys, if they disaster out early, they'll go behind with soybeans or something else.
Yeah, I think there was some language in there, Riley, about picking one of the two. There is language in the legislation about, if you had a failed crop and then came back after it, what would it be? Now, there's also language in there if you're in an accepted double cropping situation about being able to add that. But yes, they do address, I think, the way, I don't know, Jody, if you remember the actual language on that or not. That was something we talked about. I want to say growers might be able to choose which one they pick, but you couldn't pick both.
Yeah, I think they'll be able to choose, but there were still a few things within that were a little bit unclear. So I don't want to just come out and say yes, they can absolutely choose until we kind of see what the final language is.
Thank you.
Yeah, language seems to address, talks about selecting one, but you can't include both. But again, to Jody's point, those are going to be some of the details that we'll know more about once we see the regs that are being published. Well, very good. Well, again, I know everybody's got a busy day in front of them, so don't want to belabor the call, but I appreciate you joining. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions or anything that we can be helpful with.